Good afternoon, everybody, or happy snow day, everybody. My name is Pam Greensky, and I'm the Director of Operations here at Advisicon. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Best Practices in Progressing Schedules with Microsoft Project. Here at Advisicon, we are a group of authors, teachers, consultants, and technologists who are passionate about helping other organizations learn, scale, and grow with a mix of methodology and technology to deliver results. No matter the size of your company, our team specializes in maximizing your business and personal productivity by leveraging the Microsoft technology experience. We offer weekly webinars, which here at Advisicon we refer to as Webinar Wednesdays, which we spend 30 minutes to an hour each week teaching topics that range from Microsoft Project, Project Server, Project Online, Visio, SharePoint, to project program, portfolio management, and methodology approaches. After attending any of our weekly webinars, you'll receive free PDUs. Today's webinar is Best Practices in Progressing Schedules with Microsoft Project, in which you will receive a half PDU. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to go over a couple things so you know how to participate in today's event. So please review the control menu. That should be at the top right of your screen, and this control panel gives you the option to adjust the volume, the screen size, and many other settings. The audience is muted, so in order to ask questions, you'll have the opportunity to submit text questions in to today's presenter by typing your questions in the little questions pane of the control panel. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's webinar presenter. We have Tim Runcie, a Microsoft MVP for more than 14 consecutive years, and most importantly, Advisocon's president and owner. So we're off to you, Tim.
Thanks, Pam. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Webinar Wednesday. I'm very excited to take us into our topic that we have today. We were going to be addressing the importance of progressing your schedule. And part of the reason that we'll talk about this is that as you look at what people do in terms of building and managing, in many cases they do a lot of forecast and planning, but there's a large group of individuals who have project that really don't use it to tell the story. So we're going to talk about the importance of telling that story. We're going to go through some of the success secrets as well as pitfall avoidances and things that you may have picked up in other trainings or perhaps even some of our own webinars about best practices around making sure you have a good dynamic schedule. There's things that kind of build to that. But then I'd like to jump right into best practices in progressing schedule approaches. So we'll talk about things that we have available in terms of the client, the desktop, advanced approaches. Unfortunately, with the amount of time that we have, I won't be able to go into the online or team foundation server synchronization, but I do want to definitely give them honorable mentions because there's certainly a whole other session I could be going on and covering how you do that with the enterprise approach or with Office 365. So with little more than that, I want to make sure that you guys, as Pam mentioned, if you have questions or if later on you try some of these things and you can't quite remember exactly how, reach out anytime to me. Happy to answer questions to anyone. This is a very fun technology, and it certainly works a lot better when you go forward using it well. All right, let's talk about the story. So the idea is that in many cases, if you are in project management or program management, or if you're in a situation, he or she who has the most documentation typically wins. Meaning that if you can say, here's what happened, here's when it happened, and you can do it as a project unfolds in progressing that, you'll find that this is a much better way to quickly get in, get out, and get back to work, but yet have a central repository for that information. Now again, if you think about that, project managers in many cases are given projects. Sometimes they get to be elected or nominated. Sometimes they're thrust into it. But in general, as a PMP or a project management professional, you take kind of an oath, which means that, hey, listen, I am going to make sure that I tell the truth, I do a good job, we apply our trade craft in this. But one of the things that you're going to find out is that in many cases it gets very, very emotional. And so being able to remove the emotion out of the equation, and as you think about data, like for example telling the story as it unfolds, you know, you as a project program manager may have absolutely zero control of the weather, of politics, of your coworkers. In fact, you may not even have a whole lot of control of managing, your household pet. So the idea that we think we can come in and manage a project to exactly what we had planned is, in many cases, it's not reality. So being able to take that emotion out of the equation and tell that story helps you communicate effectively, clearly. And one of the things that, not only myself being an executive, but working with PMO managers and C-level officers worldwide, is that they want data. They want it early. They want predictive analysis. They want to get it as often as they can in terms of accurate information. And whether it's good data or bad data, it's still data, and that's the important part. So in our session today, I want to make sure I help you guys quickly get in so you can create that story and use the tool to help tell what happens around that. Now, I do need to talk a little bit about why people don't update their project schedules or their schedules in general. And a lot of times that's just a very standard process, and we hear comments like, oh, it's too cumbersome, it's too clunky. They actually get in and they start looking at it, or it's too hard to use, and it's not dynamic. And part of that, as you begin to go and use the tool, you'll find out that there may be a lack in your understanding or knowledge of the scheduling engine, or perhaps even how to use Microsoft Project. I find a lot of PMs who will jump in and start using the tool, and they think it's like a spreadsheet, but it's really not. It's a relational database. And I can't say enough that, if you're frustrated with error messages or things that won't move, chances are you have set a constraint. And in fact, why don't I just show that right now? This is important. So if you come in here and people say, hey, I'm going to progress my schedule, and they're going in and they're picking the start date and they're picking up and moving that, and they're just saying, hey, I'm just kind of planning out my work. The minute that we start setting a schedule by touching the start or finish dates, we create a constraint. That constraint being that inherently we've got this little symbol here on the left-hand side that tells me that you've kind of hard-coded that date. And if you see that symbol all the way down the left-hand side of your screen, then you know that literally everything has to be touched to be moved. And of course, you might as well think about using an Excel spreadsheet because you don't get the power of that dynamic schedule, that relational database. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward in terms of how to use this in the working environment and how we're working in terms of avoiding those. So moving forward, before I get into tactical tips, I'm going to talk a little about some secret sauces. And I
Tim,
want you to kind of step back. Yes,
can I
ma'am.
interrupt you real quick? Sorry about that. I don't
Yeah,
think
jump in.
your screen is progressing to the next slides. We're all just seeing the AdviseCon webinar first page.
Oh, okay. Let me back that
There we
up for a
go.
second.
It just changed.
There we go. Here we go. So there's the slide, introduction agenda.
Thank
Here's
you.
the importance of storytelling. Perfect. Thanks, Pam. And again, importantly, making sure that we've got, a good story, we can work with that. As I mentioned, tips for reasons why people don't update their project schedules or their schedules in general. And again, a lot of times it's just not understanding how to use the tool. All right, catching us up where we just left off was what I call secret sauces, or what we call tips. So the idea is that take a kind of a deep breath, take a step back for a moment and think for a second about how this is going to work. The overall idea in terms of setting scheduling, one of those is that planning and forecasting are different activities than progressing your schedule. And so I have a lot of students in the past, or we have people come and say, well, I was told never to do this. Well, while you're planning, those physical activities that you might be doing are best practices. But when it comes to actually progressing your schedule, it's a whole different story. For example, if you don't want to touch the start or finish date in the planning exercise by creating constraints, well, yes, what it does is it locks your schedule from moving. But if it's in the past and you have an actual start or an actual finish, who cares, right? Move the date, drag the bar, break the link, just tell the story, and as you're marking these things actually completed, remember your actuals will always override your plan. And I think that's an important concept, is to say, look, the approach of forecasting and planning is different than progressing, and don't necessarily hold yourself accountable to a behavior that you want for the dynamic schedule in the future, when in the past, the minute that you mark an actual start or an actual finish date, it sets and locks that task in place. Again, tip number 2, really kind of don't worry about how it looks in the past. In many cases, this is that story that says, yeah, it was kind of messy. You know, things stopped, they started, they moved around, but the idea is that you want to make sure that you're working with that. And a lot of times people struggle with this, and I kind of equate it to the old adage of, if you've ever been to your high school reunion, you know, if you go to your 10-year high school reunion, you know, people are still trying to fiddle around and talk about, you know, how they look, and there's a little posturing going on. However, by the time you get to your 15-year, 20-year high school reunion, or maybe for you, some of us, it's our college reunion, the idea is that we've had life. Life has happened. We've had kids. We've been through a divorce. We've, you know, made money. We've lost money. We've been there, and we don't care. We're really down to the core person that we are. And as a senior scheduler, in many cases, it's that experience that says, you know, planning, forecasting, different, but you know what, I'm not going to worry about the past. I'm going to make sure I tell that story. And finally, we talk about graphical indicators. So let me pop open project for just a moment, because I want to continue to showcase the fact that says, as I start updating my schedule, having some level of a dashboard that tells you predictive analysis in the future, whether it's slippage or over or under in cost and work and hours, it's going to be very helpful. And as we begin making some of those changes and we see, hey, listen, I've got little notes that pop up that say, get your project on track, or there's a pink slip for you, or if you want to look at frowny faces or smiley faces, it's really just helping you progress the work in the past, which means that that's things that happened yesterday or before yesterday, and the future continues to ebb and flow. We want it to help give you some of that visibility. Now, this is still leading up to our progressing of our schedule, and that's going to be important for us to work with. So as we go in, I want to just say a couple honorable mentions, is that when it comes to progressing a schedule, there are some really powerful things that you're going to find with Project Server or Project Online, which is inherently the enterprise version or the Office 365 version of Microsoft technologies. And the reason I mention this is that you're going to find the ability to connect to Planner. You can leverage SharePoint to create documents and tasks and issues and risks. You even say on my screen here, I've got a little T here. You've got Teams. You've got this whole threaded collaboration, Outlook, OneNote. There's a lot of power embedded directly in the enterprise environment. And so these are all things that you're going to find that you can definitely use to your advantage with your scheduling and to help tell that story. It's not just I'm forcing everything inside of a Microsoft project schedule. The other is, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but a lot of organizations are wrestling and using, you know, different types of tools like Team Foundation Server with Visual Studio, or Jira, or version 1 or Rally, or inherently they're using some sort of an agile scheduling tool. And the idea is that you can get a connector, you can link it to project. In fact, the Microsoft one links right to the client now. If you want to work with the enterprise version, you can go out and purchase or secure a connector. I know that Advisacon has built one for this, but the idea is that the details are being updated in a different tool, but they'll roll back to your schedule. So it won't cover that, but I do want to get into the live demo with Microsoft Project, because I think this is really where you're going to find some great flexibility with a particular tool. So let's take a peek at this, and let me bring up Project. And let's just kind of go through some of these. I think this will be kind of the main event here. So first of all, one of the ideas is, as we get started working and progressing in that environment, you got to remember there's about 12 ways to do everything. Project's a database. They give you graphical views. They're going to give you views that you can work with that are form-driven, but inherently the idea is find an approach that works for you. And I'm going to show some that the best schedulers worldwide take advantage of on an ongoing basis. So of course, if you haven't noticed that I've got a timeline up here, telling that story is always helpful in terms of this. It's exciting to note that, hey, you can have multiple timelines, so you can actually have 1 or 2 timelines showing. In the future, Microsoft has some great enhancements here that will let you continue to put labels and things that you want to do in that environment, but this is a clear communication component. But for right now, I want to kind of take this out of the picture and talk about progressing that schedule. So the idea is that if I want to go in and maybe I'm kind of a visual guy or gal and I want to actually kind of progress this in, let me show you a few ways to do this. So right now you can see I'm showing my critical path, and I'm certainly showing the options that I have in terms of the fields and the linkages and the different tasks. But let's go in and let's just take care of a couple of these and make them a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to turn off my critical tasks so I don't have to see that there. And I also have my baseline showing. So right now I'm going to go ahead and just turn off the baseline so you can see this a little bit better. But the overall idea is that what I'm wanting to do is to make sure that if I want to progress a task, I can certainly do it visually. So let me change my view just for a second, and I'll just hop this down into a day at a glance. And I think we can see that a little bit better. And so let's just talk about, the drag and drop approach here in terms of progressing activities. So if I go over to, say, task number 2 here, and let's say the duration is taking less or more time, if you hover your mouse pointer over the task, you're going to find little things like your mouse pointer will change to a different symbol. So the beginning or the end of your task, or in the middle, the bar, essentially, your mouse pointer will change to a % complete. So I could sit here and drag and drop my duration. I can increase the overall amount of time, and I can even go over here and drag the % complete, marking it done as of to a certain date. So you've got some of that flexibility right there on the screen to just kind of progress the start, the finish, the duration. Of course, as you know, if you pick up and you drag a bar, it will bring and try and move that task for you. Now remember, when we talk about progressing things in the past, if you have an effective way and it's going to set a constraint, don't worry about it, right? Because if you go here and say, yep, I'm going to keep the link, I'm going to move it, and I've hard-coded this date here, but now I'm going to mark it, 50% done, or I drag it done as of Monday. The idea is that I'm in a position that says it won't matter. That constraint is not going to have any bearing because I have marked it into a position where it's actually done. Now let me undo that. In terms of planning, that's not a good practice, but again, from a scheduling, updating, and progressing approach, works very well. All right, let's continue. There's lots of little tips here, and we'll kind of move through some of those. So the idea is that as we go through with visually, we can also progress deadlines. If you haven't noticed here in terms of looking at a target, is I've come in here, and you see this little red star. Well, if I go in and I set the deadline field, I can actually go into bar styles very quickly and actually set the color. So I've actually made mine from being kind of a soft fuzzy green dime into a red star so I can see that. But again, the idea is that I can visually move things around. I can change that deadline, and I have some flexibility to kind of control the information that's being displayed there. Again, I'm moving date fields behind the scenes in terms of the database. Now continuing with that progressing, we talk about the option to split a task. And I'm going to show you a couple different ways that are beyond that, but just up front, a lot of times as I'm going and working, or I find that resources are over allocated. For example, if I scroll right here, you'll notice that on rows 8 and 9, I've got double booking. And so whether you're going to come in here and add some lag time or lead time, meaning you're going to push that activity out, saying I need a couple days to finish that, or hey, listen, maybe we can crash the schedule a little bit, I'll pull them back, is you've got some of that visibility. But sometimes if we have activities that are using the same resources, we can actually right-click on that bar, and if you look closely right here, I'll kind of zoom that for you. You'll see a split task. And if you click on that split task icon, what it allows you to do is split the task. Now, I've trained, well over 100,000 people, and this is something that always comes up is I'll say, okay, now let's split this task, and people will go in, they'll try and click on this dialog box. You notice how it moves as I'm trying to hover over it. And they'll sit there and go, I can't split the task. I'm trying to get it. Well, the idea is, we won't laugh at you, but hopefully you can catch us before somebody else sees you doing it. You simply go to the section you want, click and drag the part that you want to stop the work or start the work. So I literally can split a task and say, you know what, we didn't do any work. I don't want to just show an endless bar that goes on. I want to show stops and starts. And you'll notice as I'm starting to drag and move my schedule, because it's dynamic and it's not hard-coded with dates, it will still ebb and flow. And I can basically pull those apart or stick them back together. Again, from a progressing perspective, we want to come in, mark that done. Now, continuing that theme of, hey, let's tell the story around how the schedule actually looks, let's look at another option. And the idea is that if you're progressing, whether it's a % complete, actual % complete, we actually have something called a tracking table. Now, you know that you could right-click on a task and you get this nice little drop-down where it's % completes. I personally never like to use a percent complete. I actually like to ask about actual work, remaining work, and I let project derive whatever percentage it needs to be. That's a preference that I like to see, or at least as I'm interacting with resources, I kind of want to find what that is, but I don't want to kind of go, it's 50% done. But whether you're marking things percent, the minute that you make something 1% complete, it puts an actual start date in. So let me show you a couple things that come up when you work with that. Number one is if you go to the upper left-hand corner and you right-click here, you're going to see an option to move to something called the tracking table. Now you notice I'm in a table I created called dashboard. You might be starting in the entry table, which is the most common table and the default in project. But the idea is if you want to print or you want to do something different, take a look at a summary, instead of swapping all your columns and inserting them and dragging and moving them around and then putting them back where they were before, is you can create a table. Here we have a tracking table that allows you to come in row by row and literally look at your schedule and so here's the actual start, the actual finish. Now what happens if I take an actual finish date and I put that in? So if I say this actually finished on the 16th, right, it's going to move, and you'll notice that it's also going to mark it 100% complete because an actual finish is meaning that it's 100% done. So let me undo that. The same with an actual start here. So if I come in and I'm looking at start or finish, you can actually start progressing directly from here, putting the starts, the finish dates. You'll notice that we have a percent complete, which I personally, again, like to use our actual work and remaining work. You can see here I have actual work. I didn't add the remaining work, but you've got remaining duration, which you can play with. There's another column that's called physical percent complete, and it allows you to differentiate between the fact that, hey, I'm 50% done, but maybe I'm only 20% physically completed. Or I might be 80% physically done, but I'm 50% through the hours I need to get through that. So it allows you a differentiation to begin to also communicate that story in terms of those actual starts and actual finishes. Again, this is our tracking table, and you can find that in the upper left-hand corner by simply right-clicking and switching to that. Now let me take you to a couple other places that I find very helpful in progressing. Number one is up on the Project tab. A lot of people are not aware of this, but you can come up here, and when you want to look at updating your project, you go to that Project tab, hit Update Project, and I can basically say, you know what, take all the tasks that I see here, mark them either 0, meaning there's full credit, or no credit if they are beyond a certain date, or I can set whatever percentage that may be. So here if I say, let's go back to the week of December 18th, so why don't we say December 18th is the Sunday, we're going to move this all the way up to just Tuesday. I'm going to set it whatever percent it may be. I'll do it for the whole project, or if you really want to, you could highlight a set number of rows and click Update. Project's going to literally go through here. It drives a line right through the middle of your schedule and progresses that work or those work activities. Again, very fast way to say, you know, as far as we're concerned, everything's on track. I didn't need to modify my durations. A lot of times I will go in and update the schedule. Hey, that has 5 more days left to it. And then I go and mark everything done up to a certain percent. So again, using that project and update information, you've got something that you can work with. Now here I'm just going to go ahead and zero those out. Let's look at another way, and I'm a big fan of making sure that we tell that story as we go with time. So one thing that schedulers will do as they're going through is they think in terms of where is today's date? Now if you look here in the middle of my screen here, I have a line that's called today's date. We could also pick and use something called a status date. And right here you'll notice that it says status date here. I can actually say, you know what, the status date that we're going to set is going to be on, and I could pick a date here like December 30th. And what I would do is I would tell Project to update things according to a status date, or I could use it to update it against today's date. And to do that, watch this. If I come into Project and I go to my Task tab, which most people are sitting at, you have a whole other section here called Mark on Track. And the idea is that you can click on a single row, or you can click on 10 rows or highlight 10,000 rows, but whatever you select, when you click on Mark on Track, what it does is it's going to run out and it's going to say, hey listen, I want to progress these activities either based upon a status date, or I'm going to progress that based upon today's date, whatever that may be here. And you notice if I go in and I say, listen, let's just go to our Project tab, and I'm going to go to Project Information right now. You notice here this progress to my status date that I set, which is the 20th. So if I go in here and say, hey, no, the status date really is, let's jump out to January, and we'll say the 2nd, click on OK. And then I come over here and I highlight 10 rows or 1,000 rows, won't matter. And I'm back over here saying, hey, as a PM, I'm just going to go ahead and mark these on track. You notice it progresses up to today's date or whatever that status date is. Now, if you don't want to use a status date and you like using today's date, meaning that you come in once a week on a Friday and you update that information, part of that is we can come back to our project tab, and if you select project information, you're going to see that you have what's called a status date here. And if you want to use the current date, which is really generated from your PC, you would get rid of your status date. Now, I have a lot of people ask, well, hey, listen, Tim, once I put a status date in there, I can never seem to get it out of there. So what you do is you can't just backspace and click on OK and have it let you out. It has to have a date, or it has to have this thing, NA, standing for non-alcoholic, right? It's the holidays. No, it's not applicable. Now, if I want to go ahead and select my tasks, and I'm over my task tab here, and I just say mark on track, what it's going to do, in fact, let me just do this. I'll zero these out, is it's going to find any tasks that are happening between the last time you've updated and here, and it's going to mark that done. So ready? Mark on track. It went out to today's date. You can see that, and there we go. The idea is that you've got some of that flexibility to work with. The other part of that, let me just kind of drag these off from a 0% complete, is a lot of time when you're telling a story as you go through here, you're going to find that you progress some work, and then you come in and you say, hey, listen, I need to go ahead and mark this on track, or as I'm going through and I'm basically need to move this task, I may want to move it back to a status date, or the idea is that it's incomplete, needs to move forward in time to that status date or to today's date. So if I select a task, it says, hey, as of last week we updated it, but I haven't made any progress. If you click on that, what it's going to do, whoops, there we go, I have a task I left, mark complete. There we go, undo that. And you notice it split that task for me, moved it out to today's date, really just kind of jumped that forward in time. Again, you can drag and pull that back together. But the idea is that if you want to use today's date or you want to use a status date, you can, as a PM, work from your task tab and quickly pick up your activities, move them to today's date or forward, or you can progress them up to a specific point in time. Now again, these are some of the approaches, so let's talk about a couple advanced approaches that I also like to get into. One of those is using the views or forms that we work with to see that information. So let me kind of show you a couple of the different views. Number one, I like to go in and I like to turn on the details form. Some of you old school folks will remember you can always go down here to the bottom and drag that line up as long as you're not using a timeline view at the top. And when you click on any task and you're making a few bits of information here, you can right-click down below in the form itself and change this to the schedule. You'll notice that I can put in delay, I can put in start, I can right-click and go to what we call the work, I can put in actual, remaining, I can even go in and put cost. And inherently, this is a common thing, is that you can also put notes. The task is slipped due to Scott's vacation. In many cases, I even date stamp these. I might just say 1/11/2017. This slipped due to Scott's vacation. And then I might have another note that says 1/18/2017, depending on how long your project is. Getting finished early due to scope reduction. It's important for us to tell that story, and again, if I click on OK, if I hover over this, you can see the notes appear directly around that. Now again, this information is available. I would recommend at some point you do get into, if you're exporting this, you have a 255 character limit. But the thing that I want to also talk about is not just telling the story with notes right at the task level, is something I call a do and a don't. You'll notice down here we have the option to insert an object, and literally I can insert a Word document, a PowerPoint, I can put pictures. And what this does is it literally will embed the file directly inside of that task. So we've had customers, even recently going in and they're putting pictures and screenshots and everything, and I get their project files and they go, yeah, Tim, it's 50 megabytes. I'm like, what? Your project file is 50 megs? Why is it? Well, they've been embedding everything. So not necessarily a best practice to do that. There's some other ways to go around making that happen, but you do have an option. You can kind of put those notes in place. The other thing that I like to do with this form is to actually just not use the task form, is that we can actually go in and add a different type of view to the bottom pane here. So this is the task form, but if I go to the task details form, take a look at this. The task details form, I can still go over to the schedule, but you'll notice that I can look at my constraints, I can clean them up, I can look at my effort-driven scheduling, I got my work breakdown structure. I can also put my current, my baseline, and my actual dates here. And I can use this. This is a more advanced form. You have the same functionality, but I prefer to use this in general over just the standard task form. In fact, you can even go in and play with other types of forms. For example, a view that might be helpful for you is what we call the relationship diagram. So if you're progressing your schedule, it's like having your predecessors and successors kind of lined out so that as you click on your activities, you have an idea of what's upstream and downstream. Again, you're looking at making sure that you're updating and progressing your work, but at the same time, you want to know where that's going and what possibly the impacts are. Finally, a couple ways that you may want to round out some of the advanced changes before I kind of close for today. I want to talk about the resource usage views. So I'm going to sneak over into what we call our usage capacity, and I think I'll just start with a task usage view. A lot of times this is a great way to take a task, you assign your resources, and you can see here that it has each task and then it has which resources. Inherently, the idea is that you can get into a little bit more advanced forecasting and planning. So for example, I might want to double click on my name here and say, hey, listen, it's going to be a front-loaded or a back-loaded or an early peak or a late peak contour. And so if I say, hey, it's a bell curve, I'm going to kind of shape the hours across that task, you'll notice that it'll modify this. Now, while that's quick for forecasting, you can also come in and even in a planning exercise come in and say, well, we're not going to do any work here. We're going to add some hours here, and we're going to continue to work with that schedule. And what's happening behind the scenes, in fact, let me just bring up the Gantt chart so you can see this, is that I'm actually modifying the work on this particular activity. So I can split it, I can start it, I can make some changes in terms of what we're working with. All right, in terms of also being able to plan this way, whether it's a resource usage, especially if you're working with your resources, you can go through and do the same thing. So if I go to resource usage, I can have communication with the teams and find out exactly what they're working on and what they're doing. Now, this is planning exercises, right, where I can come in and say, hey, Brian, you got this week 16 hours, and we know exactly that it is. So what we want to do is I want to actually change this to not just a day-to-day glance. Maybe I want to change it down to an hour-by-hour breakdown, or maybe it's a monthly forecast of work and effort. But as you change your time phase data, I can see what the plan is here, but you can also come in and turn on actual. In many cases, what we'll do is I don't really care to bug people about how many hours they put on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but I will change to a week at a glance, and I'll come in and say, hey, listen, guys, you put 40 hours worth of work in. Is it 40? Well, no, I've got about 18. How much is remaining? And so you can go in and you can kind of work from that perspective as looking up both your plan and your actual. Using your usage views just helps you come in and see that information. So it was 16 hours planned. We put in 8. You know, guess what? Project's going to have to schedule some additional work and carry that forward. And depending on how you set up your schedule, you literally can have that short conversation. Again, it's great for online planning. It's also great for basically live actuals in terms of working with your resources. All right. Well, I've covered some of the main key tips, tricks, shortcuts for progressing your schedules. I look forward to doing another session a little bit later on in terms of things that you can do, attaching documents, issues, risks, and notes, using a little bit more of the enterprise features and capabilities. But again, getting back to that schedule is that as you go in, you know, tell that story. Don't worry about how messy the schedule is in the past. The dynamic scheduling will simply ebb and flow in the future. And whether you have a 10-row schedule or a 10,000-row schedule, you're really only progressing a short period of time. So your focus is only what happened last week. And that gives you some tools and tips to play with as you work in that environment. All right, let's go back and let's take a quick peek here. So again, tell the story with project. You're going to find that this is one of the most valuable tools in terms of being defensible or at least helping customers or your stakeholders stay on track. If they're not getting you things done timely, mark it in the schedule. Everyone gets to see why and where things are slipping. Maybe later on we'll talk about buffers and planning activities. We'll probably schedule a webinar around that. There's some great little approaches from there as well. Again, leverage your graphical indicators to help you get that prediction, especially as you're progressing your work. The idea is that, you know, there's lots of ways to do this, but you want to have something pop back and give you some update. And again, we're striving for progress, not perfection. The idea is this is scheduling, it's life, it's going to be messy. We want to get in, we want to get out, we want to get back to work, and we don't want to fight project in doing so. All right, Pam, thank you for the opportunity to share. Let me turn it back to you.
That sounds good, Tim. We did have one question I wanted to ask you real quick from Amy Glenn.
Uh-huh.
She wanted to know if you can embed a link to SharePoint on the schedule.
So in the client, let's just do this here. That's a great question. So let me repeat that again. So the idea is that you have the ability to import like a URL or a link somewhere. If I come into the task here, we actually have the option to include a hyperlink here. You could do this if you're using the enterprise approach. There are some limitations in terms of hyperlink. Microsoft is looking at adding some additional functionality to kind of their enterprise environment. But from a task perspective, you know, if you're running out there and you're wanting to put in, you know, CNN.com and you've got a news article that may give somebody pause or at least tell that story a little bit different here. Let's just find that www. Okay, Adobe, he wants to update everything. Let's not do that. www. Oh, here's a fun site, despair.com. Free plug to Despair. These are where all the demotivators come from. The idea is that if you want to capture this, you certainly could do it in notes, you could do it in your text, but the idea is that if I can put a hyperlink reference, I certainly can do that right here. And if I hover over it, you're going to see that you can actually edit this. You've got some options in terms of some of that task. And there's actually ribbon buttons you can turn on that allow you to work with that, but you can see that directly here. In fact, you can see it right on the indicators column. And watch this. I'll click, and it's launching, and there you go. What a great question.
Great. I think that was the only question. Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Okay, and thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. You're welcome to send questions, suggestions, or feedback to Tim or to myself. You can find our information on our website or from the slide deck, and this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel later today. Once you exit today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete and submit the survey in order to get your PDUs. And you'll receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with the link to preview the recording. That'll give you the address to the YouTube channel. So on behalf of Advisacon, Tim and myself, thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you participate in future webinars. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, everyone.